Hi guys, just before we get into today's episode with Emily Kiberd, I just wanted to remind you, if you haven't already, please do subscribe and like on this video. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. It just helps me reach more people and get more of these stories out to people like yourself who really need it. And so I'll stop babbling now and we can get into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback podcast. Today, I am really excited to have on the show Dr. Emily Kiberd. So just before we get into the show, I just want to give you a brief introduction to Emily's story before we get into it. So Emily's health story actually goes back to just after she gave birth, where she began feeling chronically sick, being exhausted all the time, gaining unexplained weight, struggling to finish sentences, had chronic pain all over, and suffered from chronic injuries whenever she tried doing exercise, something I can massively relate to. She was told by everyone around her that this type of thing was normal. It's normal what you go through after giving birth. But Emily knew this couldn't be right. And so it started out finding her own way to recovery. And she slowly but surely managed to get herself to the point where she could reclaim her life. Today, she dedicates her life and her time helping others do the same through her own business, an online platform and program called Thyroid Strong. I love hearing stories about how people use their own chronic illness, own chronic issues to help others who are in the same position, because if more people did that, then I guess we'd have less people suffering in the world. So I'll stop talking now. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So I've already kind of just touched upon it a little bit. Could you take us, and excuse myself if I got any of that a little bit wrong. Could you take us back to before you had any sort of chronic health issues? What was life like before then from a health perspective? Had you ever, was your childhood, were you a sickly child or anything like that? Or were you healthy growing up?
No, I was pretty healthy, active. I did have some bouts of eczema and really bad allergies, which is probably a sign that something was going on in my childhood house. But nothing, I played 3 sports, was very active, and there is a history of depression and bipolarism in the family, but I never felt affected by that. I think knowing that history as a child, I was always like, is what I'm feeling like, I'm bipolar, questioning what is normal and what is real. But, like if I got in a fight with like a girlfriend in high school or something, but, I'm like, no, that's just, that's just normal life. So no, health-wise, everything was really good. I was at the time living in New York City and definitely burning the candle at both ends with working 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, hustling to grow my chiropractic and rehab business, and seeing patients and doing everything on my own, like the billing and the notes and the charges and taking calls. And so I'm sure there was a little bit of adrenal insufficiency or burnout, but no, I was pretty good, actually. Yeah.
Okay. And so could you take us up to I read that it was just after the birth of your child that you started to get issues. Is that right?
Yeah. I had my first child back in 2016. So he's about 5.5 years old now. And his name's Elvis. We're lovers of Elvis. And just like you said, all the things that you're told postpartum, right? And as a new mom, you don't know. And I don't really have at the time, I didn't have a lot of girlfriends that had kids. So I couldn't like call them up and be like, hey, is this normal? But extreme fatigue, like hit by a bus, sleeping on the couch. My hair was falling out, which is common, right? After giving birth, you get like these little baby hairs, but it was also like the outer third of my eyebrow. Muscle aches, like but it wasn't like, being a chiropractor and knowing strength and rehab, there wasn't a mechanism of injury. It's like, oh, this hurts. And then the next day my ankle would hurt. And then it would be this side. It was like no clear mechanism of injury, which is oftentimes when I see patients a red flag that it's not necessarily biomechanical, that it could be something from the inside or environmental. And I couldn't lose the baby weight, which is a really common thing. And so, a lot of people be like, oh, you just had a baby, that's normal. And I was like, okay, I guess that's normal. But 18 months later, I'm like, okay, 18 months, kid's 1.5, this is not normal. So I started to explore. And I know a lot of people talk about like listening to your body. And I feel like sometimes that's really soft, like it comes from a soft place. But there was just something in my intuition that was like, you know what? This is not right. This extreme fatigue, not losing the weight, the hair falling out. It's just not right. Every time I ate, my tongue would hurt. I had like eczema on my entire palm of my hand, which I had never had before. So I was having some like histamine intolerance, like mast cell activation issues. And so I saw, traditional PC, endocrinologist, kind of similar to your journey, multiple functional medicine doctors. And then one of my physical therapy girlfriends introduced me to someone you should probably meet too, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who's a functional medicine doc, and also now one of my really good friends. And she took, a barrage of blood work, and she's like, yeah, you have an autoimmune condition. Luckily, we've caught it early. You have elevated thyroid antibodies, and we need to like clean up how you're eating, figure out what is causing load on the system, and like nip this in the bud quick, because you do not want a full-blown autoimmune Hashimoto's. I mean, once you have the presence of antibodies and the symptoms, you have Hashimoto's, which is your body's attacking its own thyroid gland. But if you catch it early enough, about 20% of people can go into remission. So I am one of that 20%, and I really credit it to Gabrielle Lyon. So, I cleaned up how I was eating. When I was pregnant, I had these cravings of fried chicken and Arnold Palmer's and tater tots, just like stuff that I would not touch now. And just went on to like an optimal protein, veg, kind of like a AIP protocol, and was starting to just really uncover some of those root causes, probably similar to yours, like mold exposure. I'm really sensitive to mold. I'm kind of like the canary in the coal mine. Like I walk into a place, I'm like, there's mold in here. I know, because I get immediate brain fog. And just started to clean up some of the environmental factors. And, the thing was, I still ran my business 12 hours a day, but I started to bring in help. And I started to say no to some things and hired a team of 8 to help me run my business. And, after about 9 months, started to feel better in terms of fatigue and weight loss. And, it was not an easy journey. I think some people are like, can I take this supplement? Can I change this one thing, like cut out gluten and feel better in like by next weekend or something? And, to say like 9 months to even start to feel better, some people will be like, oh, that's a really long time. But I have the mentality that like, you give me the game plan, you execute, and you do whatever it takes. I'm kind of a little bit more of like, I don't know if this is true. Maybe this is my perception of like a little more tough love. So that was my journey. And then, I had a second child. She's 2 years old now. And even because pregnancy is a stressor on the body. So sometimes the antibodies will elevate, your thyroid will be working harder, your TSH will elevate, but through my pregnancy, my blood work was amazing, and even afterwards. So I feel lucky that I had people on my side, the right people to figure it out and be a really good diagnostician for me.
And so I'm interested because do you think that like mold and before we started recording, you mentioned parasites as well. At
Mhm.
what point have you been tested for those things? And was that before you were tested, or was it the same time you were tested? Did you say it was Gabrielle?
Yep, Gabrielle Lyon,
Oh,
Lyon.
okay.
She's in New York.
Yeah.
Um, I've done a lot of third world travel.
Yeah.
And every single place I've been, I would get sick, explosive from both ends, Nepal, Guatemala,
Yeah.
all over the world,
Yeah.
Bali. We have a house in Bali.
Okay.
Got really sick there. And I would do the conventional tests, but a lot of the tests are PCR tests. So they're just checking for like the RNA or the DNA. I'm not sure exactly, versus like a slide test. So I always thought I had parasites, but like it kept coming back negative, like, oh, you don't have salmonella, giardia, but there's so many more, there's only so many parasites that are sequenced for a PCR test. I think there's only like 5, and there's so many more parasites out in the world.
Mm.
So I have recently, and this is even though like I am in Hashimoto's remission, and I don't have any more GI upset, I still just want to be optimized. I want to feel like my best self, to be present for my kids, to be like my best self, doctor self for my patients. And Dr. Lyons sent a stool sample to a university in Nigeria that like all they do is parasites. I think it's called EKG. No, not EKG, EKC University. And it's through this guy in New Mexico, Dr. Wilcox, who sends it, has a relationship with a doctor in Nigeria. And it came back with like hookworm, roundworm. And so, there's like a little zoo going on in my in my gut. So that was a testing I did for the parasites.
Yeah.
And for the mold, I did, you can do 2. One is Great Plains Lab, mycotoxin tests, and then also Vibrant Health. Kind of the godfather of the mold tests, Neil Nathanson, says to do both because they test for different molds, and mycotoxins and ochratoxins and all the things. So I've done both. I've had my old apartment in Brooklyn remediated twice. And had done mold testing, air samples, ERMI tests, swabs, you name it. A really great mold resource is Brian Carr, Karr.
He's actually been on the show.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So his business partner, Corey, was the one that looked at my Brooklyn apartment.
Yeah.
And, I think I'm always, even as like a doctor, I like the hunt of kind of getting to like the root cause of something and being a really good diagnostician from a biomechanical level. And I think it's interesting, even though I don't do functional medicine, I hire those people who are trained in that, to do the same for my family, for my own body. And I think sometimes from a mindset perspective, we try to do it ourselves. We're like, oh, I read about glutathiones, I'm going to take that and see, versus really being systematic about it. And I think like someone who is amazing at diagnosing and knows how to apply a really good hierarchy. So like you might find a functional medicine doctor, like you have candida, parasites, mold, all the things, and we're going to just blast it all. I think that is someone who is not a very good doctor. I think someone who knows how to treat what is most important in a hierarchical kind of manner. So there's like your protocol for this is someone that is like a gem, that if you find that person, like you work with them, for me, no matter how much money it costs.
Yeah, no, I mean, the amount of money I've spent over the years, I would spend, I think, when you are sick, the thought of being healthy, you would just give any money to be healthy again. And there's not a price that I wouldn't pay. Yeah, it's interesting you say about, so Neil Nathan, I actually did, I read his book, and I actually I paid like $500 to do, like, he does these calls where he advises, and it was like an hour of his time. And at the time I was working with a doctor who didn't know loads about mold. So I was there like writing everything he was saying. And then at the end of the call, like it was just really bad way to do it. But yeah, I really like him and his approach. So now I'm always, because I'm always trying to work it out myself. Like it was amazing finding out I had an issue with mold, but then it was like, oh Jesus, mold is everywhere. I've moved into this new apartment because my apartment that I own in London is rife with mold. It's like an old apartment. So this is like brand new apartment. I've had it tested and it's not as bad, but it's still got mold in it. So do you, like, even now, like the place where you live in, can you live with a certain amount of mold in there?
If all the detox pathways are working well and are supported, I can.
Yeah.
I would prefer not to. I totally understand your situation.
Yeah.
Our Brooklyn apartment had mold. We bought a house in Colorado, found out it had full water damage. We're gut reno. We're in a house now where the AC unit just iced over and got water all over the plywood. And so it's mold is everywhere. And I used to sit in bed at 2 a.m. because I couldn't sleep because I was tired and wired, probably from my Hashimoto's, and dream about a like airstream only of aluminum in a desert, and the water source would be outside, and that would be my solution. Even though that's not the solution, in that moment of desperation in the middle of the night, that's what I would dream about. And mold is everywhere. And like, for example, through my blood work, like I'm not a good type 2 liver detoxifier from my functional medicine doctor. So I take supplements to support my liver detox. I take magnesium at night to make sure that I have a bowel movement because I know all that needs to come out. I think being in a newer build is definitely a plus. There's always off-gassing, and anytime there's water source, there's a potential for water damage and mold. But I think if you look at it through like a game plan, right? So the first step was, I'm going to test the new apartment, right, for you. And then it was, okay, based on those results, I'm going to make a decision. Am I going to stay or I'm going to go? And then based on that, so it's like, I think, especially when something has made us so sick, it can be very, very triggering. Like it can just create this sympathetic response of tears and anger and paralysis. And what do I do? And I think if you try to make it as like a systemized game plan, just like you're like, I'm making breakfast, I'm going to make my eggs, and I'm going to make my, and try and remove the emotion out of it, which I know is really challenging. I struggle with this anytime there's like any water leak anywhere. But I try to take out the emotion and look at it as a game plan that needs to get executed.
I think also there's what I've realized is now, like, because obviously my whole nervous system, and anyone who is chronically ill, their nervous system's in fight or flight. So, we're constantly thinking we're in danger. Now the knowledge that there is this mold that can, a year and a half ago, I didn't even know that was an issue. And now I'm like, oh shit, now I've got there's this thing now. But I hadn't really heard about the whole thing of brain retraining before until, I don't know, about a year or so ago. And I do think that makes a lot of sense. And we've had a few people on the podcast who just through brain retraining have been able to kind of like rewire, neural pathways and whatnot, and make it that they can be in a moldy environment and actually not react. Because obviously a lot of the stuff you've talked about has been more physical, like the supplements, the lifestyle changes. Did you look at any sort of like brain retraining or anything to do with like trauma or anything like that?
I haven't. And I haven't actually. It's kind of been like, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I have friends who've done it. And even in like my own practice, I like to address the things that are tangible first. So for example, I've had a lot of women come to me and they've had joint pain that moves around the body with no mechanism of injury. And they've been told by other doctors that they're like crazy in the head, or you're just stressed. You just need to de-stress. And so I always like to put that as the last part, like clean up the things that you can, that are within your control, and then deal with the stress. A lot of people think like stress less, do more. But what if you could like harness your stress to do more? Like challenging yourself every day to do the hard things to become more resilient. So I'm a little bit of like, I'm like, it's on the list to do the brain training, retraining, and to explore that. But I also believe in like building in like internal resilience.
But also, if you don't need to, like I'm not naturally that way inclined at all. Like I've tried at the moment, I'm trying to do a lot of like Joe Dispenza meditations and all of this other stuff, which I find really difficult. However, for me, because I've tried so much of the physical stuff, I know there's probably something that's not quite right there on the, you know, I don't know, the brain side of it. So absolutely, if you can just do it where you can do it, address the stuff that's tangible and it works, why would you then spend all of your time looking at the other stuff?
I think it goes back to the hierarchy. So like I went to a functional medicine doctor and I was living in a moldy apartment and they're like, you need to do some brain retraining. I'd be like, no, we need to be like testing the mold. But I didn't know that at the time. So I needed someone to create that hierarchy for me. You know, I have like my E3 mold candle. I have air filters in every room. So if I am in a moldy environment, I do everything that I can within my control to make the environment livable. If it's not, you know, because mold's everywhere. Like when I was just on the East Coast, by the beach, and when it would rain, everyone in the house would get like the sniffles. And the kid we had friends with a 3-year-old, his eczema flared up. He was like itching and sniffling. He was like, but like every other day he was fine. It was literally like whatever was kind of growing from the night before rain. And so, you know, it's like, hey, turn on the air filters, like get the kid comfortable. So I like to work on the tangible things, the things that I can control. It might be just a little bit of like type A New Yorker control freak, but and then building internal resilience of doing, you know, I am a big proponent of like strength training and kettlebells and lifting heavy weight to, you know, as part of that resilience. And I will look at brain retraining probably down the road sometime.
We'll have to do a part 2. I'm interested actually because you know, we talked earlier about your obviously you're big into exercise, working out, and then which I was massively, and I will be when I'm sorted. But getting loads of injuries, and that's why I can't work out at the moment. I've got chronic injuries in my hips and my elbows, and it's stuff like that. How did you? Because a lot of that then starts to create like a little bit of, you lose your confidence a little bit. And how did you start to build yourself up? Because it's like anything, kind of like inactivity makes things even worse. And then you're just in this vicious cycle where things just you get weaker and it's more difficult. Like, how did you actually start to build yourself up with that?
So it was small doses. I like to think I'm microdosing my exercise. So I think there's a cultural assumption that we got to like go to the gym for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to get like the good workout, or we need to be doing high intensity interval training or a Soul Cycle Barry's boot camp, like just and hit it hard for 45 minutes. But if you look at the people who strength train and they lift heavy, they do a couple reps, really heavy. They take a 5-minute walk, they rest. They're not doing something for 45 minutes straight. So for myself, especially with like the fatigue aspect and the brain fog, you know, at the time, if I did anything more than 20 minutes, I was like on the couch. I felt like I couldn't get off the couch for 3 days. So it was really doing small doses. And I focused on heavier weight. And, you know, for example, like if someone's never deadlifted, I start them with a 24-kilo bell. You need enough, you know, and some people are like, oh, that's too much. Well, no, you need enough resistance for the muscles to be like, okay, I know where I am in time and space and to engage. I focus on the functional movements. So not so much like a bicep curl, not so much for aesthetics, but like a deadlift, squat, a lunge. Those two, squat and lunge, are really hard for people with autoimmune conditions. and thyroid issues, and we could talk about why, a push, a pull, some sort of like anti-rotation, and a carry. So I think that's 7. But and then the moves that were achy, usually squats and lunges for the knees, I would modify. So I would lunge and tap my knee to a yoga block. Like I wouldn't go all the way down.
Mm.
And, you know, usually the first week, anyone who is deconditioned is going to feel sore and will probably have some aches and pains. But I think it's just a little bit every day and one step in front of the other and knowing that you're going to feel better. You know, the big thing for me with having 2 kids is I don't want to worry about injuring myself. Like my kids love to be held and thrown up. I do kettlebell swings with like my 2-year-old as she's my kettlebell. And I never wanted to tell them, no, I can't do that. Like mommy's injured. So it was really important for me to be strong for them.
Do you get people who say, oh no, I'm too injured to do that? And if so, like how would you get beyond that?
Yeah, totally. That's like the whole reason why I created Thyroid Strong, which was like women with autoimmune conditions who have they've like tried to run, Pilates, yoga, you know, to lose weight and have some more energy. And they're like, this is not working. So yeah, I have a bunch of women who have ordered a kettlebell and they're, you know, 12 kilo, so 25 pounds. And they're like, dragging the kettlebell from the porch into the house felt like a workout. How am I ever going to do this? But I think someone can, you know, and I teach breath and how to brace and good form and getting stacked and, you know, all the forms so that someone doesn't injure themselves. You know, oftentimes just from a biomechanical perspective, if there's distal pain, so pain in the extremities, sometimes there's not good core stability. You know, with an autoimmune condition, especially like Hashimoto's, it's usually like the shoulders and the hips are achy. Sometimes the infrapatellar tendon as it crosses the joint can be more achy. And that's just a byproduct of having a low thyroid hormone output. There's slower tendon turnover. And so it takes longer for those tendons that cross a joint to recover. But if someone was like, you're going to do 3 deadlifts and that's it, I think someone can harness, like someone can wrap their head around 3. If someone's like, you're going to do 3 sets of 15, you know, someone's gonna be like, oh, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But, you know, so I think it's really, you know, and if it's 3 reps, but it's heavier, then you're getting some, you're hitting a point of fatigue, especially for someone who might be a little more deconditioned. And if you know you're only doing it for 20 minutes and you get a long rest break, you know, it's something mentally that feels more digestible and accessible.
It's a lot more difficult to make excuses to get out of that.
Yeah, I think so.
But I used to, you mentioned Barry's boot camp. That was something I used to do a lot of. I loved that, but that creates a lot of injuries. That's what I created a lot of injuries for me. So you obviously you've been through your own recovery and you're now taking people through their recoveries, which must be incredibly fulfilling for yourself. What do you think was the biggest limiting factor to people that you see in their recovery? Like, what's the one thing that you see that maybe you're just like, if that, I don't know. For me, like, I don't know whether it would be actually if someone does have not having the belief that they're going to get there. What is it for you?
I think it's just staying consistent. I think when there's a better sense of community, which is sometimes hard online, to feel that support. So like if you're like, oh, I'm so tired and like my brain, I can't even finish my sentence. It's hard to be like, okay, I'm going to pick up a kettlebell today. Or even, you know, I think this idea of motivation is like, everyone's like, oh, I'm going to get motivated. I'm going to put in my calendar and get my outfit. It's like, so like no one, maybe 2% of people look at a weight and are like, oh yeah, I'm going to lift that, you know? So I think this idea of motivation feels like, it's like digging from a dry well. It's like such an uphill battle. But if you look towards momentum and just doing a little bit every day, marching along, it's so much easier to harness that and access that than feeling motivated. So I think, the consistency and just the momentum of reps feels like the hardest thing, but it's actually quite easy once you get started.
And I think that's got to be the case with any sort of chronic illness that you're recovering, and like consistency. And I get the thing that people struggle with, which I have in the past, is that particularly on those days where you feel really bad and you're like, oh, I feel this bad, why am I even trying? I might as well just wallow in self-pity today. I might as well go and eat that big loaf of bread over there, even though I shouldn't be eating gluten. And that's where I guess it's difficult to remain consistent. Do you talk about community? Is that do you have something in place where you hold each other accountable?
I do. I mean, I have like weekly live workouts where I show up live on Facebook and work out.
Oh, cool.
I was thinking about creating like accountability buddies in Thyroid Strong.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like I took a survey of all the women that signed up for Thyroid Strong. And then I took a survey of women who were interested, they opted in, but they didn't purchase. And there was about 150 responses in each for the people who replied to the survey. And the one factor that I noticed was the mindset difference of the people who signed up and did the program versus the people who didn't. Where there was this kind of like poor me, a little bit of like a victim mentality, versus the people who signed up and were just like, okay, let's get after it. Let's do this. This is the game plan that Emily Kiberd set out for me. Let's execute. There wasn't this like, my illness is holding me back. It's how can I optimize? How can I feel good despite my Hashimoto's diagnosis? And there was very much a disconnect for the people who did the program. It was like, this is me and this is my diagnosis. Where it felt like the people who didn't, they were their diagnosis and it was holding them back and they couldn't get beyond that hurdle, which I thought was a really interesting, differentiation between the two groups. And I think it just goes back to that, like, momentum over motivation. Because I think a lot of women, especially when they tie themselves to their diagnosis, feel like, oh, I got to get motivated. How am I going to get motivated? And it's just, I don't think it's realistic. So just like do the work a little bit every day.
Yeah, the victim thing. Like I put out an episode recently. Someone was talking about it, about people identifying with it, and I think it's quite a triggering thing to say, playing the victim, because people then automatically get on the back foot and they take it in the wrong way. And ironically, the people who take it in the wrong way are the people who are like, playing the victim makes it sound like they're making it up or something like that, and they're using it on purpose. It's actually something subconsciously that they've unfortunately just attached to it because they've had to. And I've done it in some way or another, not now, but I definitely have. And it's not bad. It's just, I think the more you realize it, the better it is for you. And it's really interesting that was the difference between the two. Have you had people where you've been treating them and you can tell that is the thing that's holding them back?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I've also done like a lot of life coaching. I'm not a life coach, but I've, as a client, done a lot of life coaching. And I think it's really interesting to watch your thoughts. So for example, the Handel group is a group in New York, run by Lauren Zander. And so when a thought comes up, and this goes back to like victim, is the thought that you're telling yourself, the words that you're saying, the situation, how you're looking at something, your perception, is it a brat, a chicken, or a weatherman? And so the brat is kind of like, I don't want to work out, like, I'm going to go for a walk later. I don't have to, like, it's, you're showing up as like a brat. And then the other one is, oh, I don't want to work out. I'm so scared. What if I injure myself? How am I going to pick up that kettlebell? Where's a good space? Like, what's my outfit look like? Like, that's the chicken, right? That's the fear. And then the third one is the weatherman, where you're just kind of like reporting what you think you're seeing. Like, oh, it looks like it's going to rain. I mean, oh, this workout space doesn't look so good, so I don't think it's going to work. So I probably just won't work out today. So when I find myself coming to a negative thought, a negative moment, something that I'm not doing, I ask myself, am I being a brat, chicken, or weatherman? And it just removes it, like, and it's also kind of fun because I'm like, oh, I'm being like such a brat right now. Okay, well, get over yourself. It removes it from like so much internal turmoil. And so you can label it, and then you can categorize it, like put it into a bucket, and you can move on. I think the rumination that happens when we're chronically ill, and I've done it. The example of being in bed, dreaming of a tin can Airstream in a desert, that is rumination. And it just cycles and propels the emotional aspect of the sickness versus taking steps to get better.
That's funny. What you've just described there. I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure that's some kind of brain retraining you've done with it with that. That's interrupting your thoughts. Going back to the times where you were, I guess, at your lowest throughout your time, because I guess someone listening to it, it sounded like you rose to the occasion, you went through it, and you there was no stopping you. I'm sure there were days where you felt like this was too difficult. How could you see a way forward? First of all, were there times like that? And second of all, how did you keep yourself going in those times? Like, how did you work on your mindset?
I think there were moments like that. I think when you have to show up for a lot of people, it removes the inner rumination. So like if I'm seeing 30 patients and my husband and my 2 kids, there's an element of burnout, but there's also this element of like showing up for someone other than yourself. And yeah, I definitely have been so sick that I cannot finish my sentence. And I think hiring a really good doctor is like number one key. And I think, having any sort of like community or support. And I don't mean going into like moldy group, Facebook groups, because those are a dark, dark hole. Do not go into those. But I think having people, like I have trainer girlfriends that I work out with that push me and are like 50 pounds less than me and lift heavier than me and remind myself to rise above. And I also think, one of my darkest moments, my kid drew a picture of me sleeping on the couch. And I was like, okay, something's got to change. So, I very much believe in like elevate, for example, especially for the kids, like elevating their life better than mine, and me better than my parents, and just elevating their experience of the world. And you can't have brain fog and be really weak doing that. And so, every single decision in my day, what I eat, what time I go to bed, when I turn off my phone, what I buy at the store, when I buy, like every single decision is for mental clarity and for a strong body and to be present for my family and my patients. So when that is the goal and the intention, I don't know. I think there's like a moment of clarity. Like I literally look at food. I know a lot of people are like I haven't touched gluten for 5.5 years. And people are like, oh my God, how could you do that? I'm like, that is like a no-brainer. That is easy. You literally look at it, you go, that's either going to hurt me or that's going to help me. And I know there are some experts in the nutrition and workout field who say that would be a bad message to send to people who really just believe in like kind of calories in, calories out. But I think for the chronically ill people, You know, you look at gluten, you can look and be like, that's not going to make me feel good, so I'm not going to eat it.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't even have cravings, but that might just be my personality type.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like looking back at your life, it seems like it's a quite a bit different now than it would have been had you, like, let's say there's an alternate reality where after you gave birth to little Elvis, you didn't get sick and you were just able to carry on as normal. How how like different is your life now compared to how it could have been, and what were the positives that how much better is your life as a result, do you think?
So how much better is my life if I didn't get sick?
No, compared to, I mean, because you mentioned obviously getting sick is terrible, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the actual, you mentioned having to slow down, having to hire other people for your business, and be a lot more. You were talking there about being a lot more mindful and present with your family. I don't know whether maybe that was something you would have come to anyway, but it sounds like that was maybe brought on through your illness. But I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. I am like I'm a Capricorn. I'm like a hard charging worker. Like I can just grind it out. And I think I probably would have ended up with something, right? Just burning the candle at both ends. I probably would not know my kids as well as I did if I didn't slow down. And yeah, I don't know. I never look at like, is it better? Is it, it's just like moving moving on or moving ahead.
Yeah.
Like moving to Colorado, that's a huge change from
Mm.
New York City. And some days I'm like, oh my God, what do we do? And then some days I'm like, oh man, this is the best. My kids get to like bike and I don't have to like be literally running to make sure they don't like cross at the street into traffic. Um, I think I think one of the blessings that has come from it is that when I see patients and things would come up and it didn't feel right, I didn't know what to do with that. And now I'm like, oh, you need to go. Like I have a patient she has eczema on her hands sweat. Um, she has a family history of like rheumatoid arthritis, but her blood work hasn't come back for that. She has anxiety, she has sleep issues. So like before my illness, I wouldn't have known what to do with that. But now I'm like, oh, you need to like dive further, right? Get your adrenals checked, your hormones, get a sleep study. You need to go see someone that can create a hierarchy of what's the most important to dissect that.
Mm.
I have patients who get bloated every time after they eat, and they think that's normal. Well, that's not normal, but I didn't know that until I had to go through the process myself. So I think, I think just being able to know what to do with that with my patients and my kids, because my kids, are also not very good detoxifiers. At least my older one's not. So if something comes up, like he's getting a little bit of like this like perioral eczema, and of course I'm like, oh, what is it? Do you have mold in the house? But I can like make a game plan and go step by step, and hopefully not get triggered. I still get triggered and get emotional, but I try to like, I can like see it. Yeah.
And final question, for someone who's going through something right now, like people who are listening to this will be going through all kinds of different chronic illness, from from Lyme to chronic fatigue to lupus to MS, to those guys who are like just starting to go through, who are in the middle of it essentially, and are going through a tough time mentally, what would be your advice to them at the moment, from a mindset point of view, to keep going?
Um, yeah. I've always defaulted to this in most aspects of my life, which is to stay curious. I think sometimes when we experience something, especially when it doesn't feel good, especially when it makes us feel really sick, we can shut down, we can have basically like paralysis, going back to the fight or flight or the freeze response, like the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges would say. But I think just staying curious and just tracking your symptoms and finding a really good healthcare provider and knowing that it's a journey. And I truly believe, like, if you figure out what is making you sick, like for you, it was all these things, but mold kind of came to the top, right?
Yeah.
That you can come out the other side. Like, I think when we feel sick, we think we're always going to be sick, but we're not always going to be sick, right? We heal innately, intuitively. And like, I've seen my 5-year-old sick, like full on mold exposure, acting like a crazy kid, eczema full body. And we removed him from that environment. And 3 weeks later, he was himself. No eczema, totally sweet Elvis. And I've seen it for myself. So the body can heal. You just got to figure it out. So just staying curious and continue to explore. I'm all about educating. And there's so many great podcasts and so much information, like your podcast out there, to listen and just like keep listening and staying curious and take the steps, which should probably find a really good healthcare provider to feel better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for, first of all, coming on, but just for sharing your story. I'm sure so many people will get a lot from this. If people wanted to reach out to you and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Everything is Dr. Emily Kiberd, Dr. Emily Kiberd. So Instagram, Facebook, my website, email. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'll include that in the show notes. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm excited to get this out there.
Yeah, thank you for having me, for sharing